like a lot of us, I started paying attention to COVID-19 when I saw what it was doing in Italy. And I started looking at the data coming out of Italy, specifically the death rate, because we were trying to put a one-size-fits-all number on the mortality rate for this disease, and it just didn't look like that would be possible based on what was happening in Italy. There are charts like this one that show a very high number of deaths, but those deaths are concentrated in the above 60 age group. 95% of the deaths in Italy, at least at this point, were in those over 60. And there really wasn't much death at all in those below 60 years of age. And I started wondering if that is a fluke of the Italian nature of just an older population, or if that would play out in the United States as well. And over the last 7 weeks, I've been gathering up data for the United States. Now, one thing that we all know at this point about the case fatality rate, the CFR, is that it only counts the confirmed cases. We can't get an infection fatality rate because we don't know how many infections there have been. But there are 3 outbreaks of this disease, all on ships that were out on the ocean when the disease broke out, that gives us a good infection fatality rate. The first one that we're going to look at here is the Diamond Princess. The Diamond Princess is a cruise liner that had 3,711 total passengers and crew. The median age for the passengers was 69, and the median age for the crew was 36, so quite a big difference there between ages. And there were 0 deaths among the crew and 13 deaths among the passengers. And you can see some of those numbers here, the age ranges of all the passengers and crew on board, and then the number of people in those age ranges and how many had symptoms and all that. All that's in these charts right here. So a total of 712 passengers, or a total of 712 people on the Diamond Princess contracted the disease, and a total of 13 died. That works out to an infection fatality rate of 1.83%, which is quite a bit lower than the 4% number that's been thrown out, but it's still a pretty high number. But it doesn't really apply to any one individual or any one age group even, because all of the deaths happened again in the above 60 age range. You see the deaths here, 1 person was in their 60s, 9 were in their 70s, and 3 were in their 80s. And the death rate, the mortality rate, the infection fatality rate for everyone else on the ship was 0, and it was lower even than 1.83% at 0.5% in the 60 to 69 age group. Now this is a great thing to look at, because every single case was identified. No one got out of there without being tested. No infections got out without being counted. So we got to see exactly what happened when you get to test everybody and count everybody. Now, one thing that's really interesting about this data is the symptomatic versus asymptomatic cases. I have been of the assumption that there's such a high number of asymptomatic cases being reported because in younger people, they're just not showing symptoms. So from those younger than 50, they're just not showing, there are a lot of asymptomatic cases there, and that's where we're getting this high asymptomatic case number. But if you look at this data, it's not the case at all. In fact, from the 20 to 29 age group and the 30 to 39 age group, the majority of cases were symptomatic. Very few were asymptomatic. All the asymptomatic cases show up in the older age groups. You have more asymptomatic cases from 50 to 59, 60 to 69, 70 to 79 than symptomatic cases in those age ranges, which was very surprising to me when I saw that. So the next 2 ships were both Navy ships, one for the United States and one for the French Navy. The USS Theodore Roosevelt is an aircraft carrier, and so is the Charles de Gaulle. COVID-19 broke out on both ships, and you can see a total of 950 infections on the Theodore Roosevelt, with 1 death for an infection fatality rate of 0.14%. And the Charles de Gaulle had 1,081 infections with 0 deaths. So that's a 0% infection fatality rate. You can also see the number of hospitalizations and ICU admissions there, which are on both ships were very low. Now, these Navy ships are obviously going to have a younger population and a healthier population than the general population. But when you put all 3 of these ships together, you've got younger, healthier, and then older and wealthier people that are represented here. So it's not a great snapshot of our entire population, but you can see that the IFR, the infection fatality rate, is 0.51% for the total of 2,743 cases that were on those three ships, I'm sorry. And 0.51% is just about the same as the infant mortality rate in the United States. So that's a pretty low number. Now, the most important takeaway to me, in my mind, is that of that 0.51%, 13 of those 14 deaths come from people who were over the age of 60. And that really means something whenever you've got every single case that is counted, every single case that is tracked, and you only end up with one death below the age of 60 out of 2,743 people. That tells us there's something to this age thing. It's not just an Italian phenomenon. And we can see similar numbers as we start to look at data from individual states. We'll start with the state of Ohio. So we've got the age groups here, the percentage of confirmed cases here, and then the total number of confirmed cases in those age groups right here. Ohio also gives information on hospitalizations, so that information is all right here, the hospitalization rate for each age group. And then, of course, the number of deaths, the percentage of deaths in each age group, percentage of the total deaths for each age group, total number of deaths, and then the CFR for each age range. And then over here, there's a graph that just kind of visually shows what these numbers say. So the segment of the pie graph here that is for 0 to 19, that represents the total number of cases. And then there's the number of hospitalizations. There were no deaths. So there's no black in this little wedge. This wedge is for 20 to 29 and so forth and so on. So this is to scale based on this dot of one person. So 18,027 of these dots will fit in this whole circle here for Ohio. That's the total number of confirmed cases as of April 30th. And that's how you can read this chart. It's the same information here, just in a different form. So with Ohio, the case fatality rate overall for the state is 5.41%. But when you look at the different case fatality rates for all of the age ranges, the only one that comes even close to that is 60 to 69. In the 80 plus crowd, it's way higher than that. In the 70 to 79 crowd, it's way higher than that. And then for everybody younger than 60, it's quite a bit lower than that. Almost insignificant, especially depending on the number of actual cases versus confirmed cases. If the number of actual cases is 10 times higher than the number of confirmed cases in any one age range, then the decimal point would just move to the left by one spot. And if that were the case in 30 to 39, you'd have, instead of 0.18 fatality rate, you'd have a 0.018 fatality rate, which is very, very low. For example, a 0.18% fatality rate means that 2 out of every 1,000 people who contract the disease die. A 0.018 fatality rate would be 2 out of every 10,000 people that contract the disease die. So you can see how the actual number of cases can really affect the fatality rates for this disease. Now, no matter what the actual case rates are, for those over 60, this is a dangerous disease. It's killing a lot of people in these age ranges. So if you want to take more look at this, you can pause it. There's more information here that I want to show for Ohio. And I've got the same thing for the other states that I've done graphics for. This is a circle that represents the entire population of the state of Ohio. So all 11,690,000 people would fit in this circle. And that graph we looked at just a second ago is scaled down to fit in that circle to be appropriately sized. This represents the number of confirmed cases to scale for the whole population of Ohio. This gray outline here, this gray circle in the middle, it fades away as you get to 10 times the number of confirmed cases. So these are the confirmed cases, and this is 10 times the number of confirmed cases. And that represents, maybe if the disease has spread at 10 times the rate of confirmed cases, then these are the total number of people that have had the disease in Ohio and are now recovering and developing antibodies and have some at least limited immunity in Ohio. This white range here represents all the rest of the people that would need to contract the disease, recover, and become at least partially immune, or have immunity for at least some amount of time before herd immunity is reached at the inside where the color starts on this red part of the outer part of the circle here. That represents 60% of the population, which is the lowest estimate that I've seen for herd immunity. The highest is 80%, which is right here where it starts to get opaque. That's 80% of the population. This black line is 84% of the population. And the reason that that number is there is because about 16% of the population is 65 and above. So with 16% of the population 65 and above, they all fit, everyone who's above the age of 65 fits in this outer ring, which is within the immunity range for the state of Ohio. And it's the same thing across pretty much every state in the union. So we can achieve herd immunity. Lots of people would need to contract the disease, but we can achieve herd immunity without without the older people having to contract this disease, and they're the ones who are really at risk, as you can see from lots of the numbers that are coming through. This is Georgia, and the data from Georgia is April 26, which is the last date that Georgia was giving information out on deaths in terms of the ages of those that have died in the state of Georgia. They've since changed up their reporting to make it a lot more difficult for someone like me to get the numbers that I want. And here is the immunity circle for Georgia. Here's Michigan, which has the highest overall CFR of any of the regions that I've got graphics for. And you can see that that's primarily due to a very high fatality rate in the 80 plus age range, and also the 70 to 79 age range and the 60 to 69 age range. Michigan has a lot of cases in those age populations, and then the death rate is very high in each one. Here is the data from New York City. Here is the immunity circle for New York City, and one of the positives, really the only positive to such a widespread infection in New York City, is that they are much closer to establishing herd immunity than anybody else in the United States. As you can see, if there are 10 times the number of actual cases as compared to confirmed cases, then they are about a third of the way to herd immunity. Tennessee has the lowest overall CFR of any of the states that I have graphed. And you can really see why that is by looking at the number of cases, or the percentage of cases that are between 60 and 80 plus, or over 60. It's only that portion of the pie right there. A good deal less than a quarter of the cases are in that upper tier age range. Compare that to the state with the most, or the highest CFR, Michigan, and you can see that quite a few more, a much larger percentage of their population above 60 that has been infected with this disease. And that's why the death rate is so much higher in Michigan than it is in Tennessee. Now they also have a higher rate in those, a higher death rate in those groups, 10.15, 21.2, 30.28, as compared to Tennessee, looking at 4.2 in the 60 to 70, 9.71 in 71 to 80, and 19.21. That really explains the entire difference in the overall CFR between Tennessee and Michigan. And here is Tennessee's immunity circle. Colorado, like just about every state that I've graphed, has a huge proportion of deaths in the upper tier of the age ranges from 60 and above. That works out to about 92% of the deaths in the state are in those age ranges. South Carolina is another state that is in the process of opening up again, and they've done a better job at protecting their older population. They're still getting infected at a pretty high rate, but they don't seem to be dying at the same rate. I'm not sure what South Carolina is doing there, but it's led to a smaller overall CFR, mainly because their 80 plus CFR is below 14%. In their 70s, CFR is below 10%. Oklahoma is the smallest state that I've done graphs for, and it's also got the strangest age breakdowns. They're also another state that's in the process of opening up. Here we can see all 8 areas that I've graphed, and these are all to scale with each other. New York City has more cases than the other 7 areas combined, more cases and more deaths than the other 7 areas combined. And then there is, these are all 8 areas when the totals are done into one graph. And the numbers pretty much speak for themselves, and you can see how how much more deadly this disease is as you get older. 52.9% of the cases and 94.7% of the deaths are in people over age 50. And then 34.5% of the cases and 84.7% of the deaths are in people over age 60. Now, of course, the death rate is not the only way to measure the severity of a disease. The seriousness of the disease that does not kill people is also very important. So I like to look at the ICU admissions. Hospitalizations don't bother me so much. It doesn't really tell us a lot, in my opinion. They also don't give us any good data on who is being hospitalized, just an overall hospitalization rate of around 20% in most cases. And in the United States, I can't find anybody that is giving good data on ICU admissions. We have an overall percentage, but not who is being admitted to ICU. But Sweden is actually really good at reporting ICU numbers and who their patients are that are going into ICU. This chart is from the Swedish reports on ICU admissions. And you can see that they count 65 or older as an underlying condition. All of these are the underlying conditions that they are tracking in the ICU for COVID-19. And hypertension is the leading cause of putting someone in ICU at 37.5%, followed by diabetes and then chronic cardiovascular disease, chronic heart and lung disease. Those who are 65 years or older make up about 35% of the ICU patients. If you go and look at another chart, you can see that those who are 60 and above make up about 53% of the ICU admissions, and those who are over 50 make up 79% of the ICU admissions in Sweden. And another thing you see in Sweden is that males account for about 75% of ICU admissions. So it's almost like being male should be an underlying condition in Sweden. Not sure if that's the case in the United States. As I said, there's just not really anywhere that gives good data on who is being admitted to ICU. So I hope this information has been good for you. It's been valuable for you, and maybe it helps you make a good decision on how to proceed if you're in a state that is opening up as you decide whether or not to go out into the world again. I think I'll leave you with a quote from Dr. David Katz, who is the former director of Yale's Preventive Research Center. He said, "It's pretty clear that people under 50 without a major chronic disease are at very low risk of severe infection. And we could just say every household where you've got nobody over age 50 and nobody has heart disease or diabetes, back to the world." A lot of states seem to be coming up with similar strategies as they start to allow people to go back into this new COVID-19 world. Eventually, we'll all have to decide when and how we plan to restart our lives, because this virus isn't going anywhere. I hope this data arms you with more information that will allow you to make the right decision for you and your family. Thanks for watching. If this was a positive video for you, please share it and get this information out to others who need to hear it.